I didn't expect a celebration, but I didn't expect to be demoted either, especially not 22 minutes after requesting a raise to reflect the most successful quarter of my career. It still doesn't feel real. That morning, I had walked into Sintracor's executive floor with every reason to feel proud. My division had exceeded all 3 quarterly targets. We secured our largest long-term analytics deal, and our client retention score had quietly outpaced 2 major competitors. For 8 years, I had poured everything into this company, often invisible, always reliable, and today was the day I would finally ask for what I had earned. I stood in the center of the boardroom, laser pointer in hand, guiding the leadership team through our growth report. My team's strategy had brought in $12.4 million in projected contracts. I spoke with clarity, no hesitation. People nodded. The CTO leaned forward. Even the most skeptical board member asked for a copy of my forecast deck. When I finished, Nathan Prescott, our CEO, gave a tight, calculated smile. "Solid work, Elawan," he said. "Really solid." No applause, but the room felt warm with approval. I gathered my laptop, waited for the others to trickle out, then stepped toward Nathan's office. I didn't rehearse my request. I didn't need to. "Nathan," I said, standing just inside the doorway. "I was hoping we could briefly discuss my compensation, especially given this quarter's results." He didn't look up right away, just clicked his mouse once, maybe twice. "We'll revisit that later," he said, still not meeting my eyes. "Right now isn't ideal. Things are shifting." I blinked. "Of course," I replied, keeping my voice even. At 10:09 a.m., I left his office. At 10:31, I received the email. Subject: Role adjustment notification, effective immediately. Your position will transition to strategic transition support. My hands froze on the keyboard. The words blurred. No team, no leadership title, no reason. I called HR. "It's part of a broader restructuring," they told me. "We're realigning resources across departments. This isn't personal." But no one else had been moved. By the time I walked past my old office, someone else's name was already on a new placard. I sat at my new desk, across from the printer, beneath a buzzing light. Everything was still, and for the first time in 8 years. I had no idea what my job actually was. I'd always believed I could handle disappointment. I'd weathered budget cuts, reorganizations, and moments of being overlooked. But nothing prepared me for what it felt like to return from being demoted and find my new office was a folding desk in the hallway outside the copy room. There was no door, no privacy, no nameplate, just a rolling chair beside a half-used filing cabinet and a phone that hadn't been programmed. Someone had left a crumpled takeout bag under the desk. I didn't know what was worse, that it had been someone else's workspace before me, or that no one had bothered to clean it up. I stood there for a few seconds too long, laptop still in my hands, trying to decide where to place it. The hallway was already alive with movement, product leads walking to meetings, assistants balancing coffee trays, a junior manager skimming his phone. Everyone saw me. No one said anything. The silence was deafening. I sat down slowly, knees stiff. The desk wobbled when I touched it. I opened my laptop, took a deep breath, and tried to remember what my new role, strategic transition support, was even supposed to mean. I had no brief, no assigned projects, just a vague directive from HR and a smile that said, "We're sure you'll figure it out." 10 minutes in, I noticed that my name was gone from the org chart. Not just moved, gone. I searched again. No Elowen Marsh under operations, not under special projects. I clicked through to the leadership directory, where I'd appeared for years. Nothing. It felt like I had been erased. Someone walked past. It was Brian, one of my former team leads. We had worked late nights together, prepping for investor reviews. And he used to call me the quiet engine of the company. He made eye contact for half a second, then looked away like he hadn't seen me. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but he'd already turned the corner. I wasn't just embarrassed, I was ashamed. And then the final sting. I stood up to print out a few documents, mostly old onboarding manuals I thought I could review. At the printer, a tray overflowed with fresh copies of an internal presentation. The title caught my eye: Q4 Strategy Kickoff, hosted by Operations Leadership. It was a planning event I had created 3 years ago. My idea, my structure. I'd led it every year since. I scrolled through the attendee list on the last page. My name wasn't there. The agenda had been rebranded. My session topics stripped out. And at the bottom, under host, was the name of someone I had once mentored, someone who used to come to me for advice. I gathered the papers, walked back to my desk, and sat down without a word. Behind me, the printer groaned back to life. It kept going, spitting out page after page like it had more purpose than I did. And for the first time, I began to wonder if that was exactly the point. The printer kept humming behind me like it had something more important to do. I sat at my hallway desk, pretending not to notice every passing glance, every footstep that hesitated and then moved on. My inbox was empty. My calendar had been wiped. I clicked through old folders just to give my hands something to do. That's when I saw the banner. It was plastered across the homepage of our internal portal. Introducing PulseCore TM, a smarter way to understand your people. I blinked. Once, twice. The graphic showed a clean dashboard interface, performance trends, team morale scores, early burnout signals. I didn't need to read the details. I recognized every single element. I had built it 2 years ago. I'd started sketching it out on a whiteboard after work. I called it Insight Grid back then, a real-time pulse check tool, drawn from anonymous engagement data and soft signal analytics. I tested it quietly with a small team in Latin America. The results were stunning. Engagement jumped, absenteeism dropped, and feedback became constructive. I'd pitched it to Nathan as an internal-only pilot. I still remembered his reaction. "Interesting," he said, waving a hand. "But let's not get distracted by soft data. Just keep it internal. Don't burn time on it." I hadn't. I built it at night. The write-up beneath the PulseCore banner featured a quote from Nathan. "We needed to redefine how we listen to our people, and that's what PulseCore does. It's not just data, it's insight." My stomach turned. There it was, in black and white. Nathan Prescott, taking credit for the one thing I'd built out of belief, rather than obligation. I kept reading, even though it hurt. PulseCore is the product of deep collaboration between our executive team and our strategic innovation unit, guided by CEO Nathan Prescott's vision for ethical performance analysis. I almost laughed. Ethical. The only thing ethical about PulseCore was the way I wrote it, to protect voices like mine. I searched the article for my name. Nothing. I checked the product page, the internal repository, the feedback archive. No mention of Insight Grid. No metadata that tied back to me. I opened the original spec I'd sent to HR Legal to review performance data privacy protocols. Gone. Replaced by a sanitized, 2-paragraph compliance blurb filed under Prescott Office. I opened an archived folder from the old development server. I remembered storing a PDF summary there, just in case, when I found it. My breath caught. The PDF was still intact, but under Author, the metadata now read Prescott Executive Innovation Team. No timestamp, no trace of the nights I stayed up logging patterns, tracking trends, documenting breakthroughs. They hadn't just stolen my tool, they'd erased me from its existence. I leaned back in my chair, eyes stinging, not with tears, but something colder, deeper, a kind of grief I didn't expect. Not for the credit, but for the way I'd trusted the system I helped build. Trusted that hard work spoke for itself. that innovation would be honored. I looked around. No one else seemed to notice the screen or the way I was staring into it. People walked past me with lattes, with client decks, with earbuds in. It was like I was already gone. I minimized the page. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure of where to go next. Then I remembered something. 3 years ago, when I was still part of the Compliance Rewrite Task Force, I'd created a performance tool writer, a clause to govern the ethical use of any internal metrics that could affect promotions or evaluations. At the time, no one thought it mattered. Nathan had skimmed it, signed it, and moved on. I hadn't. I had the original file. I had the clause. I had proof that this system, my system, was tied to a framework of ethical accountability, one that was still embedded in every PulseCore contract. And if they had used it without maintaining that clause, well, then PulseCore wasn't just unethical, it was exposed. I reopened my archive folder and scrolled slowly until I found the file name, Ethics Writer v3 final.docs. The printer behind me clicked again. Another page. Another message I didn't need. But this file? This was one they never meant to print. I hadn't looked at that file in years. It was tucked deep in an old compliance folder I kept archived on a personal server drive, buried beneath performance briefs and process maps long since retired. But the name caught my eye the moment I saw it again. Ethics Writer, Phi3, final.docs. I clicked, and the document flickered to life. There it was, the addendum I had written nearly 3 years ago, plain, unadorned, and very much forgotten by everyone but me. The header still read, Internal Ethics Oversight Addendum, for executive review only, drafted by Elowen Marsh, Strategic Operations. I stared at the screen for a long moment, not touching the mouse. In the silence, I could almost hear the conference room where I had first presented it, that old whiteboard covered in scrawls, the late nights spent aligning legal phrasing with HR policy, the quiet conviction that employees deserved protections, especially when no one was watching. Back then, I'd been selected to join Sintracor's Contract Modernization Task Force. It wasn't glamorous work, dozens of hours reviewing documents no one read, but I took it seriously. If leadership would never say it out loud, then the contract would have to say it for them. That's when I drafted Clause 3.7c. I scrolled until I found it. Still there, tucked between 2 standard procedural notes, written in clinical language. In the event that a direct personnel demotion or reassignment is executed by any executive during an ongoing internal performance review cycle, an automatic compliance alert shall be generated and routed to investor oversight if criteria 3.7 say and B are met. At the time, I'd added it as a safeguard, not because I thought someone like Nathan would abuse their power, but because deep down, I knew they could. We all did. We just didn't say it out loud. Nathan had barely skimmed the addendum when I presented it. I still remembered the way he flipped through the pages, impatient, tapping his pen. "Looks fine," he said. "Let's keep it readable. We want compliance, not a sermon." I had smiled and said nothing. Now, years later, the clause sat there like a fuse no one remembered wiring into the floor. I pulled up the company's contract archive portal and searched the most recent signed executive agreements. I didn't expect it to still be there. Surely it had been revised or replaced. But when I opened the latest version, my chest tightened. Clause 3.7c was still present, word for word, still marked active. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of that realization settle. They hadn't removed it. They hadn't even noticed it. Nathan had signed every updated contract, including his own, without ever rereading what we'd buried inside. A quiet sense of clarity crept in. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't just humiliated or forgotten or stolen from. I was holding something they didn't even know could burn them. I read the clause again, carefully. 3 conditions had to be met. The employee demoted must not be under performance review. The demotion must occur during an active internal performance evaluation period. The action must bypass formal documentation protocol. All 3 applied to me. My performance was stellar, no negative review. The company was still mid-cycle on its quarterly evaluations, and no one had given me formal documentation, verbal warning, or even a legitimate reason. I had been stripped of my role in silence. But the clause had been written for moments just like that. I opened a notepad and began documenting everything. Timestamps of emails, names of meeting attendees, my original performance review status, internal messages. I wasn't ready to send anything, not yet. But I was preparing something they wouldn't see coming. For the first time since I sat down beside the printer, I felt grounded, not angry, not emotional, just prepared. I saved the contract file again under a new name, Trigger Ready 3.7c. They'd erased my name from the product I built. They'd removed me from the chart, the meetings, and the floor plan. But they'd left this. And now, I was going to use it. When you become invisible, you learn how to see things others can't. I had spent the last few days in silence, tucked between a humming printer and a scuffed filing cabinet, watching the world move on without me. No one asked me how I was doing. No one looked twice when I walked past. I had become part of the background, a fixture nobody questioned, and that gave me freedom. After finding the buried clause, the one I had written years ago and now realized could bring down Nathan, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not pride, just clarity. They thought I was done. Instead, I had just begun. I still had limited access to our internal systems, read-only. But enough. Most had forgotten I'd once helped design the architecture behind our analytics suite, including the compliance reporting and employee sentiment tools. They hadn't revoked my permissions because they didn't think I mattered. So I started digging. Each morning, I came in early. I scanned our HR dashboards, performance surveys, internal feedback loops, every system I once helped build. I pulled archived reports, copied internal audit trails, and mapped discrepancies between what teams submitted and what leadership reported. It didn't take long to find the first red flag. An employee engagement survey from the previous quarter showed 72% of respondents selected no confidence in leadership, but in the official version submitted to the board, that number had mysteriously dropped to 27%. I checked the edit logs. The original file had been modified by someone using the admin login, Admin Prescott. Metadata confirmed the time and date, 3 hours before the board's quarterly review. I kept going. Another report. Same pattern. Negative comments about executive transparency. Gone. Flags about burnout among middle managers. Deleted. In every instance. The data had been manually altered before it reached decision makers. I started documenting everything. I built a private archive, labeling each file with a timestamp, logging who touched what and when. I didn't speak a word about it. I didn't forward anything, but with each day, the case took shape. Sometimes, I'd spot names I knew, colleagues I'd mentored, appearing in redacted sections of reports. Their concerns stripped from the final drafts. I imagined them wondering why nothing ever changed, why no one listened. The answer was simple. Someone had erased their voices, and I knew exactly who. At one point, I printed a page just to confirm the system still processed the same way I'd built it. The printer behind me buzzed, feeding out line after line of what should have been employee truth, but had been twisted into a curated narrative. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, heart steady. I didn't feel rage anymore. I felt ready. I had always believed that if you worked hard enough, stayed loyal long enough, someone would notice, that your value would speak for itself. Now I understood the truth. In places like this, silence doesn't protect you. It erases you. But if you pay attention, If you watch closely enough, you can collect the silence, trap it, document it, and eventually turn it into something loud enough that even a boardroom can't ignore. I didn't need Nathan to acknowledge me. I needed proof he couldn't bury. By Friday, I had built a master folder on my encrypted drive. Inside, employee reports, before and after versions, edit logs, screenshots, flagged metadata, system flow documentation, and, at the center of it all, the original survey data that contradicted the executive summaries. I hadn't sent a single email. I hadn't raised a single alarm. But I was no longer the woman sitting quietly beside the printer. I was the one watching the building from the inside. And soon, I would be the one holding the match. I had the evidence. All of it. Labeled, time-stamped, cross-referenced, and locked in an encrypted archive. Every manipulated report, every stripped comment, every executive edit. It was all there. Now came the hard part, deciding what to do with it. The office was quiet when I arrived that morning. I'd started coming in earlier than usual. Not to impress anyone, no one noticed anymore, but to think. To be alone with the silence before the day began. I opened my laptop and stared at the folder labeled Trigger Ready 3.7c. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I knew what needed to be done. I created a new email. 2. Oversight@valmontcapital.com. Subject: Formal investor notification. Sintracor ethics breach. Confidential. I typed slowly at first, then with more certainty. The language was firm but controlled. No emotion, no bitterness, just facts. I introduced myself by title and role, explained the restructuring that had removed me from leadership, and outlined the violations I'd uncovered. I cited Clause 3.7c from the Executive Ethics Agreement, included examples of manipulated internal feedback, and highlighted the risks it posed to investor confidence. As of date, the above clause remains active in all standing executive agreements and appears to have been violated by CEO action without appropriate procedural justification. I attached supporting documents, original survey files, before and after versions, metadata logs. My digital paper trail was clean and airtight. This communication is intended for transparency and in protection of the long-term integrity of Sintracor's ethical structure. I reread the message twice. My hand hovered over send, but I didn't click it. I sat back in my chair and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Something didn't feel right, not because the email was flawed, but because it wasn't time. Too soon. And it would be seen as retaliation. Too raw. And it would look personal. And if Nathan caught wind before the board did, they'd spin the narrative faster than I could prove the truth. I'd learned that the hard way once before. 5 years ago, I sent an internal report about a budget misallocation in a project led by a director with close ties to Nathan. I had data, I had screenshots, but I sent it too fast, framed it too bluntly, and they dismissed it as a misunderstanding. The budget was quietly corrected, but I was never invited to submit feedback again. That day taught me something important. Even the truth needs timing. So instead, I clicked Save Draft. The message slid quietly into my drafts folder. I renamed it Project Ripple Do Not Send Yet. I attached every file, every screenshot, every clause. I even included a timestamp note, hold for release, trigger if board meeting is announced or investor pullout begins. Then I set a reminder on my phone. Monday, 7:00 a.m., review before sending. I closed the laptop, not with hesitation, but with clarity. This wasn't weakness, it was strategy. I didn't need to shout to be heard, not yet. Still, something made me open the system one more time before leaving. I refreshed the HR analytics dashboard. A new report had been uploaded, fresh survey data from a recently closed team feedback cycle. But something was off. The report was nearly empty. Just one line. All data currently under review. Final version pending. That had never happened before. Normally, surveys populated in real time, then were finalized at the end of the cycle. This version, it had been scrubbed. I stared at the screen, heart slowing. They were trying to wipe the trail, to pre-clean data before it could even be reviewed. But what they didn't realize was that I had already downloaded the raw version from 2 days earlier. I had the pre-scrubbed file. I had the baseline. They thought I was sitting quietly by the printer, still licking my wounds. What they didn't know was that I had already mapped the cracks in their foundation, and I was just waiting for the right moment to knock. I thought I had seen the worst of it, but the system had more to say. It was nearly dusk when I reopened the analytics portal. The latest team survey, the one I had found blank 2 days earlier, was now showing partial results. But something still felt wrong. The structure was there, but the content had been scrubbed clean. That's when the message came in. It was from Mira Chen, a former HR data analyst I'd worked with during my time in ops. She had left Sintracor a few months ago, quietly, after a department reshuffle. We hadn't spoken since, and the message was short, just enough to catch my pulse. Mira. Hey! I don't know if I should be saying this, but did you know the Q4 survey got rewritten? I stared at the screen, for a moment. I didn't respond. Then my fingers moved quickly. Ilawan. Rewritten? When? Mira. About a week before it was finalized. I was there when they printed the red lines. Nathan asked for them personally. The next few minutes passed in silence, but my mind was racing. I already suspected the data had been manipulated. Now I had someone who had seen it happen, and someone who'd named the person behind it. I opened the archived feedback surveys and began comparing versions. The raw file, the one automatically saved before manual editing, showed 68% of employees selected "Don't trust executive decision-making" under the leadership confidence metric. It also included 17 anonymous comments calling out the lack of transparency and inconsistent accountability from the C-suite. The published version, which had gone to the board, told a different story. Only 22% marked distrust. All the comments were gone. The edit trail confirmed what I feared. The changes had been made under the username Jenna, Exec Support. Jenna, Nathan's executive assistant. But it wasn't just her fingerprints on the file. The final document, a polished PDF sent to the boardroom, included a digital signature block, right below the summary. Above the compliance confirmation line, approved by Nathan Prescott, I sat back, eyes fixed on that name. He didn't just allow it, he approved it. My breath slowed. My hands didn't shake. There was no emotion left in it, just the quiet. Exacting relief that I hadn't been paranoid. I hadn't overreacted. I'd seen something wrong. And now I had the final missing piece. I added the file to my encrypted folder. Then I opened my working document, Project Ripple, and updated the contents. Original Q4 survey, final edited version, metadata logs. Time-stamped chat from Mira, saved as an anonymized .txt. Screenshot of Nathan's signature block. Then, I opened a blank spreadsheet and began building the timeline. Survey launch, September 4th. Data closure, October 2nd. Manual edits initiated, October 6th. Final PDF created, October 9th. Nathan's approval timestamp, October 10th. Board received final report, October 12th. I didn't need to interpret anything. The facts were now loud enough. I stared at the spreadsheet, dates, names, systems, and silence. It all added up to something undeniable. Clause 3.7c didn't just apply now. It had been triggered. Still, I didn't send anything, not yet. Instead, I documented the final entry in my internal notes. Trigger conditions met. Confirmed CEO authorization of manipulated report. Witness account secured. Then I saved and encrypted the file. Twice. I knew what I was holding. Not just proof of a lie, but a pattern. A system built to silence people like me. now exposed by the same system I'd helped create. As I packed up for the night, I paused at the door. The hallway was quiet, but in my mind, the weight was already shifting. Nathan still sat in the corner office. The board still hadn't seen what I had, but they would, soon. The fuse was lit. Now. I just had to wait for the boardroom to smell the smoke. There's a moment between knowing and acting, thin as breath. And then you cross it. I sat at my desk long after most people had gone home. The glow of my screen, the only light in the hallway. My hands hovered over the mouse, still as stone. The folder was ready, the evidence complete. I'd checked it 5 times. Everything was in place. The surveys, the edits, the metadata, the signature, even the timeline. I opened a blank email. Not to HR, not legal, not anyone on Sintracor's internal chain of command. They couldn't be trusted. Instead, I typed a single address, oversight@valmontcapital.com. Valmont Capital was Sintracor's largest outside investor, holding nearly 22% of our equity. More importantly, they had an independent oversight committee empowered to intervene in corporate governance when executive integrity was in question. No red tape, no internal filters. If you wanted to be heard, you spoke to the money. I started writing. Subject: Formal Compliance Report. Ethics Breach. Clause 3.7c. Violation to whom it may concern. I am a former director of strategic operations at Sintracor. I am writing to report an ethics violation involving manipulated internal data, leadership misrepresentation, and procedural breach of Clause 3.7c within Sintracor's Executive Agreement Addendum V3. I kept it factual, calm, detached. I attached my credentials, internal references, and a direct citation of the clause I had authored myself. This clause states that if an executive initiates restructuring or demotion during an active performance review cycle without transparency or documented cause, an automatic compliance flag is to be routed to investor oversight. Then I laid out the pattern. The original Q4 employee survey results, the altered version submitted to the board, the edit logs showing deletions of negative feedback, the metadata linking changes to the executive assistance account, and finally, the approval page signed by Nathan Prescott. All conditions necessary to activate Clause 3.7c have been met. I submit this report for immediate review and ask that all documentation be preserved in its original state for audit. I didn't CC anyone, not a soul inside Sintracor. When I was done, I reread every word. It wasn't angry, it wasn't dramatic, it was a clean, surgical record, just sharp enough to cut. I hit send. The email disappeared from the screen like a stone dropped into still water. I sat back and waited, not expecting a reply right away. These things took time, layers of legal checks, confirmations, filters. But just before 9:00 p.m., a reply landed in my inbox. Subject: Ethics Breach, Sintracor. Thank you. We are reviewing. We will be in contact if clarification is needed. Please preserve all documentation. No emotion, no reassurance. But the line, "Please preserve all documentation," was the first ripple. It meant they were treating it as legitimate. I closed my laptop without a sound. This wasn't a victory. This wasn't a takedown. Not yet. It was ignition. I moved with purpose, printed 2 physical copies of the documents, stored one in a sealed envelope at home, and uploaded the encrypted files to an off-site cloud with 2-factor authentication. I backed them up on a secure USB, stored in a fireproof lockbox I hadn't used in years. There would be no system glitch that made this vanish. Then I walked out of the building like it was any other night. But something had changed. I could feel it in the quiet, a subtle weight in the air, like the room was holding its breath. As I passed the kitchen, I overheard 2 employees murmuring near the coffee machine. "Did you hear?" "Yeah, Valmont's looking into something. Compliance, I think. Like, Serious. About Nathan? No idea. But the board moved their next session up to Tuesday. I didn't pause. I didn't speak, but inside, I knew. The match was lit, and now. The room would decide whether to burn or rebuild. It was quiet the morning after. Too quiet to last. I arrived at the office just before 8:30 a.m. on Monday. The usual hum of casual chatter felt clipped, subdued. People moved quickly through the halls. Eyes down, voices lowered. Something had shifted, just enough to be noticeable if you were looking for it. And I was. No one said a word to me, but the glances were different. Curious, cautious. I slid into my usual chair beside the printer and opened my laptop like it was any other morning. The email from Valmont Capital still sat unread in my inbox, exactly as they'd left it. Thank you, we are reviewing. Please preserve all documentation. No emotion, but no dismissal either. Just forward motion. By 9 a.m., internal emails began to shift in tone. One from PR advised all departments to direct media inquiries to corporate communications. Another from HR read, "Please refrain from speculating on ongoing reviews. Confidentiality remains critical." That's when I knew the silence was cracking. At 11:15 a.m., a whisper found its way to my ears, passed from a junior analyst to someone at marketing, then to the intern near the kitchenette. "Valmont's looking into something," someone said. "Ethics review, I think. Serious." That afternoon, it broke into the open. A small note appeared on a mid-tier investment analysis blog. Sources confirm an internal ethics audit has been initiated at Sintracor, triggered by oversight protocols linked to Valmont Capital. Representatives declined to comment. It was short, unverified, but it was enough. Within hours, Twitter threads were lighting up. Investors speculated. Subreddits dissected possibilities. By the end of market close, Sintracor's stock had dropped 4.1%. Just enough for people to notice, not enough to recover from quietly. By 2:30 p.m., the company calendar showed a sudden cancellation. Our Q3 strategy meeting with senior investors was marked postponed indefinitely. No explanation, no reschedule date. At 3 p.m., a company-wide notice hit everyone's inbox. Subject: Executive Committee, Emergency Session. When? Tuesday, 9 a.m. Location: Boardroom Level 21. Mandatory attendance for executive leadership. It was signed by our general counsel and the chairman of the board. That was the moment the air shifted. Meetings were rescheduled. Department heads stayed behind closed doors. Someone in finance whispered that Valmont had requested access to internal documentation for integrity assurance. Nathan's office door remained closed all day. I didn't need to be in that room to feel the pressure building inside it. From my desk, I watched the edge of an unraveling system. And for once, I wasn't on the outside. I wasn't the forgotten person beside the printer anymore. I was the shadow they had overlooked and now couldn't ignore. At 5:40 p.m., I passed a director from finance in the hallway. He glanced at me for half a second, long enough to register something, but not long enough to stop. A week ago, he would have looked right through me. Now, he blinked like I might know something he didn't. I returned to my desk, opened my folders, and made one final update to my report log. Monday, 5:45 p.m. Emergency meeting confirmed. Market dip verified. Clause 3.7c in motion. I didn't feel triumph. Not yet. This wasn't about revenge. It was about momentum. I refreshed my inbox again. No new messages from Valmont. Just that same. Perfect line. We are reviewing, watching, moving. I leaned back and closed my eyes for just a moment. I could feel it coming. Not noise, but weight. Not panic, but inevitability. Just before heading out, I passed the print station near legal. A paralegal was holding a stack of older executive contracts, flipping to the final pages. I glimpsed the margin notes, highlighted lines, cross-referenced dates. At the bottom of one page, I saw it, Clause 3.7c. They had found it. I wouldn't be in the boardroom tomorrow, but my fingerprints would be all over the table. I wasn't in the room, but the walls were starting to echo with things I'd written. By 8:15 a.m. The executive floor was unusually quiet. No hallway banter, no shuffle of prep meetings, just heavy doors and muted voices. The emergency session was scheduled for 9 a.m., but most board members had arrived early. I watched them pass the glass wall of the elevator, briefcases tighter in hand, expressions unreadable. No one invited me. No surprise there? I took my seat beside the printer like any other day, opened my laptop, and refreshed my inbox. Nothing new, no one acknowledged me. But I could feel it, the tension humming just under the surface, like a string stretched too tight. At 9:05 a.m., the boardroom door shut. Then, silence. For 30 minutes. The entire building held its breath. Even the printer behind me was still. No one walked the halls. No meetings started. The only sounds were the occasional tap of a shoe or the distant chime of the elevator. Then, at 9:41 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in almost a year, Cameron Ruiz, one of the quieter voices on the board. I'd worked closely with him during a crisis rollout 2 years ago. We weren't friends, but he was fair, methodical, and precise. Cameron, they're talking about you and the numbers. You did your homework. That was it. Nothing more, but it was enough. I leaned back in my chair, heart steady. They weren't just discussing market shifts or vague ethics. They were reading my work, following the trail, and that meant the clause, the one I buried years ago, had finally surfaced. Inside that room, I pictured the scene, a projection screen, pages flipping, someone from legal pointing to the line under Appendix C, Clause 3, 7c. Any executive restructuring during an active performance review cycle shall trigger immediate compliance reporting to oversight in cases lacking procedural transparency. I imagined a pause, the uncomfortable kind, the kind that comes right before someone realizes they've signed their own downfall. Did Nathan sign this? Yes, it's in every version since V3. Nathan would try to defend it. He'd say the data was under review, that the decision was strategic, not personal. He'd minimize, deflect. That was his talent, turning blame into fog. But then they'd open the original employee surveys, the ones with 68% of employees marking no confidence in leadership, the ones with full comment threads, time-stamped edits, and metadata linking the deletions to his office, the ones with his signature at the bottom of the final, falsified version. Back at my desk, I spotted a paralegal stepping out of the legal suite with a file in hand, thick, marked Compliance Review, Internal Only. I caught a glimpse of a highlighted line as she passed. Clause 3.7c, my name wasn't on the cover. It didn't need to be. The truth was already moving without me. I didn't check my phone again. I didn't refresh my email. I sat quietly and watched the clock tick to 10:32 a.m. Another message arrived. Cameron. Vote's happening soon. I didn't reply. This wasn't about me taking a victory lap. This was about systems, about accountability, about putting pressure where it counted, contracts, numbers, signed approvals. It was about exposing the arrogance that comes from believing no one's paying attention. And I had paid attention. For 8 years. I had watched, recorded, rewritten, protected, until they made the mistake of turning that silence against me. Now, the data was louder than I could ever be. I stared out the window across from my desk, the city below flickering in morning sun. Inside the boardroom, voices were rising, decisions narrowing. I didn't need to be in that meeting, I was already there. Some people mark history with headlines. I marked mine with a minute hand. By 11:30 a.m., I hadn't moved from my seat beside the printer. The boardroom door on level 21 remained shut, silent behind smoked glass. There were no raised voices, no leaks, only the weight of decisions, pressed down into quiet. And still, I waited, outside the room. The rest of the office had all but paused. Analysts stretched coffee breaks into surveillance missions near the stairwell. Conversations dissolved the moment I entered a hallway. Everyone was watching something, but pretending not to. I just kept my eyes on the clock. 11:31 a.m. A shadow moved behind the frosted glass. I couldn't see who it was, but they were standing. Someone had risen to speak, or to leave. Then another figure followed. The door handle twitched once, then again, and then it opened. 11:32 a.m. Nathan stepped out, first and alone. His face was pale, as if every ounce of color had drained to his collar. He didn't look angry. He looked hollow, unanchored, as if someone had pulled the floor out from beneath him and he was still waiting to land. Behind him, no one followed, no handshakes, no murmured reassurances, just the soft, muffled thud of papers being gathered inside. He stood in the corridor, eyes scanning the hall like he didn't know where to go. Then he saw me, and for a moment, just a breath, he didn't move. I didn't either. He walked toward me slowly, with the gait of someone who couldn't quite believe this was real. The hallway stretched between us like a courtroom aisle. I sat perfectly still. He stopped 3 feet from my desk. His voice came out quieter than I expected. "Was this you?" I didn't blink. I didn't smile. I didn't look away. "No," I said. "It was you." He held my gaze for 2 seconds longer. Then he left. Not a single person greeted him. Not a single door opened. He disappeared into the elevator, and the metal doors closed without ceremony. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like weeks. Not from triumph, from release. My shoulders dropped, my jaw unclenched, and I let the silence settle, this time on my terms. I hadn't yelled, I hadn't fought. I had written, documented, protected, and it had been enough. A few minutes later, the boardroom emptied. Quiet footsteps, hushed murmurs, documents zipped into leather folios. One of the compliance officers paused in the hallway, glanced toward me briefly, and nodded. I nodded back. No words were exchanged, none were needed. At 11:46 a.m., a message popped up on my screen. From Cameron Ruiz. Subject, quiet integrity, you held the line. We all saw it. I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I needed affirmation, but because for so long. I had wondered if anyone would notice. I clicked over to my drafts folder. The email to the investors was still there, unsent, waiting. I hovered over it with my mouse, then closed it without opening. It had done its job without being sent. I stood from my chair and walked to the window that overlooked the east end of the city. A breeze stirred the blinds. The light was softer now. Clouds had rolled in, but not in a threatening way. Just a reminder that change didn't always need thunder to arrive. Someone passed behind me and muttered, "Good morning, Ilawan." Not a whisper, not a warning, a real greeting. I turned back toward my desk and opened a new document. The title bar blinked. I didn't know what came next, but I knew this. I never raised my voice. And still, they heard me. The offer came 2 days later, wrapped in boardroom pleasantries and polished by legal review. They called it a gesture of good faith. A chance to restore balance and rebuild trust. I sat at the long table I once helped design, facing the 7 members who now regarded me not as a problem, but as a solution. Cameron delivered the line. "Elowen, the board would like to offer you the role of interim CEO, effective immediately." The room fell into the kind of silence that waits for gratitude. But I didn't fill it. Not with thanks, not with vengeance, just breath. Measured, deliberate breath. I closed the folder in front of me and looked each of them in the eye, one by one. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I'm not here to inherit damage. I'm here to build something better. Their expressions flickered, not offense, not confusion, but a kind of earned respect, the kind that only follows someone who never once shouted, yet made the ground shift. I've been working on something quietly, I continued. A platform that protects the invisible ones, the analysts, the architects, the night shift coders, the ones who create systems and get erased from the credits. I slid a second folder across the table. This one was thinner, but it carried more weight. It's called Proofline, I said. A tool that documents ownership of internal innovation, an embedded ledger, immutable, transparent. It also includes an ethics signal, built into the workflow. When leadership behavior contradicts internal data, the system doesn't just log it, it notifies the right people. Cameron opened the folder. His eyes widened slightly at the prototype outline. We'll be launching publicly next quarter, I added, and I've already secured pre-seed backing from firms who've had enough of top-down opacity. The room was quiet again, but this time, no one was waiting for me to speak, because I already had. That evening, I stepped out of Sintracor's glass lobby for the final time. No boxes, no applause, just a soft click behind me as the door shut. By 6:40 p.m., I was unlocking the door to a different building, small, old brick, 2 floors. My name wasn't on a plaque, no one greeted me inside, but I didn't need anyone to explain where I belonged. The windows overlooked the city's east side, the same skyline I'd stared at from a printer station 2 floors too low. Only this time, the light wasn't borrowed. I powered up the prototype dashboard, watching the system load like a heartbeat stabilizing. Beside it sat a folder labeled Clause 3.7c, Legacy Copy. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Across the room, a junior engineer poked her head in, someone I'd hired that morning. Hi, I'm looking for Ms. Marsh? I smiled. Just Elowen. She smiled back and nodded. We're ready when you are. I followed her down the hall toward the conference room. Our conference room. No glass walls, no stage, just a team and a mission. No one had to introduce me. I had already arrived.